Whilst Cubicle 7's Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is my favourite game of all time, I was a little bit surprised and worried when early last year they announced Warhammer the Old World, the role-playing game, was due sometime in 2025. So is the game I loved about to end? Is it going to be replaced? Is it going to keep going? And this was the bit that concerned me. And the reason this new game wasn't on my most anticipated games of 2025 is because I thought I didn't need it. And then I stumbled across an article in Wargamer that I've been reading that I'm going to read to you today. And I think I need both. But I am happy that they do plan to keep 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay going. So let's get over to the article in Wargamer. There is a full interview. I think it's just over an hour length that's on YouTube. So if you don't want to read that or listen to my sort of summary, I'll put a link to the full hour-long video in my description. So here is the cover, and it's actually based on so they've released the Warhammer, the Old World new minis game in Games Workshop, or what I think it's now called Warhammer. The actual stores are actually called nowadays. And that is what this is based on. I foolishly thought it was based on the Warhammer Fantasy World. It is, but when we get into it, there's a little bit of a time. So the reason it's called the Old World is because it's the older world. Times past. So the exclusive here, how Warhammer the Old World RPG breaks from Warhammer Fantasy role-playing tradition. The upcoming Warhammer role-playing game promises a quick route to a grim, perilous adventure with the Warhammer universe. So the interview here was between some of the staff here at Wargamer, and then we have Dominic McDowall-Thomas and Padraig Murphy. So they opened with, how do you create a new role-playing game set in Warhammer's old world when Warhammer Fantasy Roleplaying has done such an excellent job with the setting? It has. It's an amazing job. What was the challenge facing the team at Cubicle 7 when they began the work on Warhammer the Old World Fantasy Roleplaying? A title set in the grim and perilous world of Warhammer, but it's 250 years earlier. So they've got around some of the lore and everything that's going on by setting it back 250 years. And the great thing about humans is humans don't really remember a lot of things going backwards, so they can create their own world out of this and their own lore. The launch of Warhammer the Old World RPG is getting damn close now, Murphy says, though the team can't quite commit to a date. First books we're going to get is the Player's Handbook and the GM's Guide. So pretty much like Dungeons and Dragons does, and then later we're going to get a starter set and a GM screen, which actually I think that follows what they did with Soulbound, Wrath and Glory, 2nd edition. Actually, Imperium Maledictum they did the core rulebook, didn't they? And now we've got the Player's Guide and the GM's Guide due soon, and a starter set. So it is slightly different over that one. So over the course of our conversation, the pair set out their vision for the game. So there's going to be a blend familiar to Warhammer Fantasy's role-playing motifs with a novel rule set and particularly grounded sense of pace. And particularly grounded in a sense of place, which they hope will make it easier than ever for newcomers and old hands to start role-playing in this gritty, grim, dark world. Murphy calls the old world itself the star of the show. For him, the setting is what calls out even when all the dice have been forgotten, and you want to go to experience that sort of grim and glorious, bloody setting. If you're unfamiliar, think of a kind of fantasy version of the Renaissance Europe with its hidden world of Lovecraftian cults gnawing away at the veneer of civilization. The old world time period is the current version of the Warhammer setting that's licensed the Games Workshop is supporting with its rules and models. As much as of a newer version of the world, it has a far less content than the older Warhammer Fantasy setting. Less of the map has been filled in, and the lore is far less established. So they've kind of got a blank, not quite a blank canvas, but they can do what they want within reason. Obviously, the lore 250 years on is set, because all of that already exists in the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay and so on. I'm pleased that it's just going to be not a continuation, but what's the reverse of a continuation? Let's say a backstory, a prequel of where we are now. And this means that players will come from the old world fresh, whether they're brand new setting or the grizzled Warhammer veterans. The quest to get players grounded in the setting as fast as possible underlies the many design decisions that Cubicle 7 has made the differential for the old world RPG from Warhammer Fantasy role-playing. And most obviously is the totally new rule system. And this is the bit that intrigued me because of Imperium Maledictum and Warhammer Fantasy roleplay use the same system. I was wondering whether they were going to use the same system or whether they were going to go down the Soulbound route or whether they were going to use Wrath and Glory. Then using none of these, they are using a brand new system. So the old world abandons the D100 system. So they love it, but it does have its complexities. It does. But this is going to use a set of, well, it's going to use a dice pool D10 system. And that has got me excited because one of my other favourite games, The World of Darkness, so Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, all used a dice pool of a D10 system. The character's stat line will actually be very similar to Warhammer, so we're still going to have strength, toughness, weapon skill, ballistic skill, and so on. It's close enough that Murphy promises the conversion system that will let you move characters between the two. Even better. Oh, I wonder if you could time jump. That'd be interesting. Actually, because the old world doesn't have, I don't think it has the other sort of portals quite yet. So I don't think the chaos like war technically has happened as yet because there's no I had a brief look at some of the old world differences because there's no colleges of magic yet, so the winds does exist, so it's going to be really interesting for me. I'm almost tempted to actually pick up the main rule book, which hopefully will have some of the lore from Games Workshop and based on the minis game, not that I can paint minis. So conversion typically you need to put typically you'll need to put a 0 at the end of the old world characters to move it into Warhammer Fantasy role playing. Stats will even be compatible with the old world miniature war game. Oh, you gimps. That's going to just tempt me into buying minis. Well, actually, it's probably not because I haven't got any real friends to play a minis game together, or the pools of money, or the amount of patience I'm going to need to even put them together, let alone paint them. So chill checks will simple to resolve. The characteristic is the number of dice that you roll in your pool, and the character's skill, who is the target number. We've got a much smaller skill list, less than 20 skills, though they may be familiar to players. Oh yeah, because Warhammer, it's probably got 50, maybe 60 different skills as well. So it just lets you roll in dice and counting successes. I did the thing, or it very well didn't get to do it. You just lets you roll the dice and count successes, Murphy says. Players can quickly determine for themselves. I did the thing, or I did it really well, or I didn't do it at all. It's a big break from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, but he says Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay exists and continues to exist, and we didn't need to make it again. So that's the bit that I'm pleased about. So it continues to exist, so it means they're not going to stop supporting it. It's a simple enough core system that's been designed to shut up and get out of the way, and rolling the big handfuls of dice is certainly on theme with Warhammer game. But being simpler than the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay doesn't mean the old world is dumbed down. For start, combat is going to hurt. So combat, it's the one thing that we've kicked around for a long time. He said, is how they're going to get the sort of game mechanics set in the tone and establish the world that they live in. The resulting system puts more weight on storytelling with than number crunching, where combat is brutal and the risks are clear. We looked at all the stuff that we liked in Warhammer Fantasy role-playing combat rules and tried to build on it. So if you're dealing with opposed roles, where both the attacker and defender rolls, with ties going to the attacker in most cases, whether you're rolling to strike or parry, when you get to hit first time, you're staggered, you're on the back foot. Your characters are competent, but they're pretty much ordinary people. They don't have a stash of hit points or wounds to protect them. Should be staggered and then staggered again, then in most cases it will lead to an injury. And one thing that Warhammer does is injury tables, random tables really well. But this means rolling on an injury table similar to the luxurious critical tables in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Teeth go flying, skulls are cracked, limbs come off with sprays of claret. If you're already carrying injuries and you get injured again, you roll more dice on the injury table, which of course means you get worse injuries. All sounds good. That's one of the things I love about Warhammer. It's just how quickly it can. Well, it makes combat deadly, and it means that if you are drawing your weapon, you should be prepared to either kill the person or Worse, your character may not survive. So it shouldn't be taken lightly to pull out your weapon. He then expands on this. For a gritty game, health shouldn't be a quota of hits you can take and then your character is dead. But if you get hit, you feel it. There's no artificial limits on how many bruises you can take. One of the big faults, isn't this, of 5th edition? It's just, you can have a character with like 100 hit points and then all the way down. And it makes no difference to your character until you get to 0. You can be as effective at 1 hit point as you can as 100 or even 1,000 hit points. Warhammer doesn't work like that. It's a lot grittier, it's a lot darker, it's a lot deadlier. And they seem to be carrying this on in this new edition, which is going to be good. There's always a chance you're going to be okay and then just end up with a blooded face. But as you throw in more D10s into your injury table, you're very quickly getting towards these grim, grisly amputations, decapitations, and death. Well, decapitations tend to mean death. I suppose it depends how many heads you've got. As a player, if you've got the choice of eyeballing that and deciding where your risk appetite is, how far you're going to push it with your character. McDowall says, but you won't have the false certainty of hit points to guide you. Just a growing list of the terrible things that have happened to your character. More so than any other role-playing RPGs that Cubicle 7 makes, the Old World campaign have had a strong tie with specific locations. So if you're playing out of the core rulebook, that will be Talagad, the town near the mountain ring city of Talabheim and the centre of the Empire of Men. One of the steps of the character creation is to roll some of the tables to see if you're contacted within the town. These are specific people, NPCs with their own goals, agendas, and connections. So they are starting you off, not, some books when you buy them, they go, here goes a massive lore dump, which is quite difficult and it can be hard for a games master to sort of consume all that in one go. So they're just going to give you one town, one little area, and you're going to build from that area, and then your player characters will have NPCs or contacts that will help them or give them adventure and adventures ideas. So we wanted to make sure that people had right in front of them, but they could get involved in the game straight away without needing a lot of existing knowledge. Murphy recalls that during playtesting, as soon as the player knew the premise of the scenario, they were off the leash. So the first thing everyone did, he says, was I want to talk to my contact. I know this Kalsvit's gang boss. He definitely knows something about this. So they would just go off and then talk to that NPC, which helps you build. So there's some parallels here with the RPG Blades in the Dark, a game of criminal hijinks in which players give every player the starting contact and the mapped out city of Dustfall to interfere with. Blades is pretty much a permanent spot on the guide for RPGs, but it does not rely on players and the GM alike having the ready access to information. Apparently, the old world isn't quite so tightly bound to Talagard. Only McDowall says the best way to explain the system was to completely worked example of our setting, but it's tags that if you want to create your own setting, then it's easy for you to do. The player contacts all have an archetype. There's a noble, there's a heretic, and so on. So if you want to run a game in Null or Merenberg or anywhere else, the GM knows what you can do, and he can make up 20 of these contacts, and they'll immediately have a framework that they're really intriguing in the game and tie them to the players and the setting. As you can see from the character art, the options of creating a wide variety of characters from Breton Knight Exile to a Halfling to Imperial Dwarf have already been shown off. Player characters will also have more practical connections to the starting town throughout the campaign, whether that's Talgard or the setting brewed up by the GM. This starts with a choice of career for the character. The character list isn't as broad as the 64 that are in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, but there's still 30 or so, and yes, Ratcatcher is still there. In Warhammer Fantasy, you start in the career, then after a few adventures, your career is now your adventurer, and you go from one to another. That's fine and the focus of the game, but we wanted to take our careers and make sure they remain quite relevant for a while. Careers come with assets. They may be a farm, 2 acres, or you're trying to feed a family. It can be an alchemy shop or a rat catcher with a small or vicious terrier. They're all sources of strength for your character, but anyone that has watched John Wick knows that having something you care about means that you've got something that you can lose, which brings us to probably the most interesting part of the new RPG. The era that the old world RPG is set in is as close as the Gilded era as the Warhammer world gets. The powers of chaos are at their lowest ebb, and though the Emperor's man has no single ruler, it is yet to suffer the catastrophe of the damage of the Azavar's Cull, which reality warp and invasion, which lurks not far off in the future. The year is where all the little powder kegs are being stocked and everything is piled up so high, no one seems to be aware that any spark can set it off. We are thinking about what it would feel like, where adventure would come from, having to be a lot more careful, to move slowly, working through the others and sending out their tendrils. What if, as an ordinary citizen of the world, you stumbled across something that couldn't afford you shining the light on for its darkest activities, something that, once you know it exists, will make your life a living hell. That is the Grim Portents, the BBEG of your old world RPG. Murphy said that early readers liken the setup to thrillers and folk horror. So that's going to be an interesting twist to it because, yeah, the original Warhammer is quite a dark and gritty world, but all of the chaos is there and it's all happened already. So it's pre-existing and there is corruption. But I think from where this is looking, say there's no so because the big war hasn't taken place yet and the chaos is slowly coming into the world, it's going to be an interesting twist on because even sort of 250 years into the future where Warhammer exists now, not everyone is fully aware that chaos has happened. The rulers and the hierarchies are, but some of the local villagers and such aren't aware of it. Multiple antagonists could be trying to manipulate in the same groups. Maybe the university, you've got scholars studying away at the law of Khemri. One faction might be speeding up their research to expose them into a particular arcane street. So they continue down here. There's no question of how the party knows one another either. Discovering the Grim Portents is effectively your session zero. Even if the players were feeling that their characters wouldn't necessarily know each other beforehand, by the end of session zero, they do. They faced a common threat, and this is an awful situation together. All of this just sounds pretty amazing. So I'm glad I watched the video, and I'm glad I read through that because, as I said right at the outset, I was a bit concerned that my favorite game would disappear, and the only concern I have now is how many books are they going to release, when are the books coming out, and how much is it going to cost me? Because I'm in. You've got me instantly intrigued by this one, and I actually can't wait. By summer this year, we should have hopefully a date or an idea of when it's coming. They kind of implied this summer, but they didn't say whether that was release date or pre-order date. So do keep checking Cubicle 7's website. Subscribe to the channel. I'm going to do news on this as soon as I have any more, as soon as I see any of the books, any idea. If I can pre-order a book and get a PDF copy early, I'll be going through them on this channel. So pretty much everything Cubicle 7 do is going to be an instant thing for me. Is this the sort of thing you're looking forward to? If you are, please let me know down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. My name's Adrian for Dungeon Dyslexia. Thank you for watching.